seatbelt legislation requires the fitting of seat belts to motor vehicles and the wearing of seat belts by motor vehicle occupants. Laws requiring the fitting of seat belts to cars have in some cases been followed by laws mandating their use, with the effect that thousands of deaths on the road have been prevented. Different laws apply in different countries to the wearing of seat belts. National comparisons. Australia. In Australia, the use of seat belts by all vehicle passengers is compulsory. The states of Victoria and South Australia introduced a requirement for belt anchorages in 1964, although not for the belts themselves. In 1970, the use of seat belts by vehicle occupants was made compulsory in the state of Victoria, followed by the rest of Australia and some other countries during the 1970s and 1980s. The subsequent dramatic decline in road deaths, equivalent to thousands of lives saved in Australia alone, is generally attributed to seatbelt laws and subsequent road safety campaigns. Seatbelts are not required for bus occupants, reversing drivers, and those driving some slow-moving vehicles. The laws for these differ depending on the state or territory with jurisdiction. Canada. All provinces in Canada have primary enforcement seatbelt laws. Ontario was the first province to pass a law which required vehicle occupants to wear seat belts in 1976. United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, seat belts must be worn at all times if they are fitted to a vehicle. Passengers may be exempt from wearing a seatbelt for different reasons. Since September 18, 2006, children travelling in the UK must also use an appropriate child seat in addition to the standard seatbelt, unless they are 12 years or over and or have reached at least 135 centimetres in height. In the UK, a requirement for anchorage points was introduced in 1965, followed by the requirement in 1968 to fit 3-point belts in the front outboard positions on all new cars and all existing cars back to 1965. Successive UK governments proposed, but failed to deliver, seatbelt legislation throughout the 1970s. In one such attempt in 1979, similar claims for potential lives and injuries saved were advanced. William Rogers, then Secretary of State for Transport in the Callaghan Labour government, stated that, on the best available evidence of accidents in this country, evidence which has not been seriously contested, compulsion could save up to 1,000 lives and 10,000 injuries a year. United States. In the United States, seatbelt legislation varies by state. The state of Wisconsin introduced legislation in 1961 requiring seat belts to be fitted to the front outboard seat positions of cars. New York State passed the first law in the U.S. mandating the use of seat belts in 1984 under the leadership of John D. States, an orthopedic surgeon who dedicated his career to improving automotive safety. Depending on which state you're in, not wearing a seatbelt in the front seat is either a primary offense or a secondary offense, with the exception of New Hampshire, which does not have a law requiring people over age 18 to wear a seatbelt. In the front seat, the driver and each passenger must wear a seatbelt, one person per belt. In states such as New York, New Hampshire, Michigan, etc., seat belts in the rear seats are not mandatory for people over the age of 16, though it is extremely advised. The driver and front seat passengers aged 16 or older can be fined up to $50 each for failure to buckle up. A primary offense means that a police officer can pull you over for the seatbelt law violation alone, and secondary offense that you can be punished for a seatbelt law violation only if you are already pulled over for another reason. By January 2007, 25 states and the District of Columbia had primary seatbelt laws, 24 secondary seatbelt laws, and New Hampshire had no laws. In 2009, Public Health Law Research published several evidence briefs summarizing the research assessing the effect of a specific law or policy on public health. One stated that safety belt laws work, but there is strong evidence to support that primary enforcement safety belt laws are more effective than secondary enforcement laws in increasing seatbelt use and reducing crash injuries. Another found that there is strong evidence that enhanced seatbelt enforcement interventions can substantially increase seatbelt use and its associated benefits. Developing countries. In many developing countries, pedestrians, cyclists, Rickshaw operators and moped users represent the majority of road users. In India, all cars manufactured after March 25, 1994 are equipped with front seat belts. The rule was extended for rear seats in 2002. The usage of seat belts is to be implemented by the respective states, with most states making seatbelt usage for front seat passengers mandatory in 2002. Older vehicles that did not have seat belts originally were exempted. In Indonesia, seat belts are only mandatory for front seats. Many low-entry car models are not equipped with rear seat belts. In Malaysia, the first stage of safety belt laws was implemented in 1979. This was expanded in January 2009 to include rear passengers. Passenger vehicles registered prior to January 1, 1995, and those weighing more than 3.5 tons are exempted from this rule. The third and fourth stages, which will deal with baby and child seats and the number of passengers in a vehicle, have not taken effect. The table below gives an overview of when seat belt legislation was first introduced in different countries. It includes both regional and national legislation. Actually, only vehicles registered after June 15, 1976. In previous registered vehicles, fitting is optional, €1 required by the law, but no penalty for violation at the time, €1 required by the law, but low enforcement, an unregistered trademark pound definitely introduced by this date, possibly earlier, effects. Studies by road safety authorities conclude that seatbelt legislation has reduced the number of casualties in road accidents. Experiments using both crash test dummies and human cadavers also indicated that wearing seat belts should lead to reduced risk of death and injury in car crashes. Studies of accident outcomes suggest that fatality rates among car occupants are reduced by between 30 and 50% if seatbelts are worn. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates that death risks for a driver wearing a lap-shoulder seatbelt are reducing by 48%. The same study indicated that in 2007, an estimated 1,547 lives were saved by seat belts in the United States, and that, if seatbelt use were increased to 100%, an additional 24 lives would have been saved. An earlier statistical analysis by the NHTSA claimed that seat belts save over 10,000 lives every year in the U.S. According to a more recent fact sheet produced by the NHTSA, in 2012, seat belts saved an estimated 12,174 lives among passenger vehicle occupants 5 and older. Research has found that lap-shoulder seat belts, when used, reduce the risk of fatal injury to front-seat passenger car occupants by 45% and the risk of moderate to critical injury by 50%. Research on the effectiveness of child safety seats has found them to reduce the risk of fatal injury by 71% for infants and by 54% for toddlers in passenger cars. In Victoria, Australia, the use of seat belts became compulsory in 1970. By 1974, decreases of 37% in deaths and 41% in injuries, including a decrease of 27% in spinal injuries, were observed, compared with extrapolations based on pre-law trends. By 2009, despite large increases in population and the number of vehicles, road deaths in Victoria had fallen below 300, less than a third of the 1970 level, the lowest since records were kept, and far below the per capita rate in jurisdictions such as the United States. This reduction was generally attributed to aggressive road safety campaigns beginning with the seatbelt laws. Opposition: a number of groups and individuals are opposed to seatbelt legislation. The most common grounds for opposition are the view that laws requiring the wearing of seat belts are an infringement of individual liberty. Claims that official estimates of the number of lives saved by seat belts are overstated or fail to take into account additional risks for other road users. Risk compensation and other theories. The most common basis for disputing estimates of the benefits of seat belts is risk compensation and risk homeostasis, advanced by researchers John Adams and Gerald Wild. The idea of this theory is that, if the risk of death or injury from a car crash is reduced by the wearing of seat belts, drivers will respond by reducing the precautions they take against crashes. Along with many others, Adams accepts the hypothesis that wearing seatbelts improves a vehicle occupant unregistered trademark's chances of surviving a crash. In order to explain the disparity between the agreed improvement in crash survival and the observed results, Adams and Wilde argue that protecting someone from the consequences of risky behavior may tend to encourage greater risk-taking. Wilde states, "To compel a person to use protection from the consequences of hazardous driving, as seatbelt laws do, is to encourage hazardous driving. A fine for non-compliance will encourage seatbelt use, but the fact that the law fails to increase people's desire to be safe encourages compensatory behavior." Studies and experiments have been carried out to examine the risk compensation theory. In one experiment, subjects were asked to drive go-karts around a track under various conditions. It was found that subjects who started driving belted did not drive any slower when subsequently unbelted, but those who started driving unbelted did drive consistently faster when subsequently belted. A study of habitual non-seatbelt wearers driving in freeway conditions found evidence that they had adapted to seatbelt use by adopting higher driving speeds and closer following distances. In another study, taxi drivers who were habitual non-wearers were timed over a route with passengers who did, and others who did not, insist on the driver wearing a belt. They completed the route faster when belted. In addition to risk compensation, Adams has suggested other mechanisms that may lead to inaccurate or unsupportable predictions of positive benefits from seatbelt legislation. Case control studies based on voluntary use of safety aids can attribute to the aid benefits that actually come from the risk-averse nature of those likely to use them voluntarily, particularly early adopters. Fatality rates are subject to considerable stochastic noise, and comparison of single years or short periods can be misleading. Individual liberty. Opponents have objected to the laws on libertarian principles. Some do so on the grounds that seatbelt laws infringe on their civil liberties. They argue that not wearing seat belts is a victimless crime, as the only person harmed is the one making that decision for himself about his own life. The counterpoint to the libertarian view toward seatbelt laws is that mandatory usage may reduce injuries and deaths but also reduces the economic cost to society. Another notable scenario is of rear-seated passengers being forced forward in a crash and thus inadvertently harming the driver or front passenger. A University of Wisconsin study demonstrated that car accident victims who had not worn seatbelts cost the hospital on average 25% more. Side effects of seat belts. Critics have pointed to fatalities and injuries caused by wearing seatbelts. In neck injury cases, the deceleration from a high-speed impact can cause a seat belt wearer's head to continue forward suddenly while the body is restrained, potentially causing paralyzing injuries. A study of such injuries notes seatbelts save lives. However, they may cause injury to adjacent structures, and when they malfunction can cause injury to the abdominal viscera, bony skeleton and vascular structures. The motor industry has attempted to reduce these injuries by modification of vehicle design and safety equipment. Long thought to be a side effect, but rather it's a psychological reflex that risk compensation is used as a result of some seatbelt use. See also, car accident, click it or ticket, clunk click every trip, road safety, notes. References and further reading, John Adams. Risk. Routledge. ISBN A1-85728-068-7 Wilde G.S. Target Risk PDE Publications, 1994, The Isles Report Seat Belt Savings, Implications of European Statistics, UK. 1981, sourced from Death on the Streets, Cars and the Mythology of Road Safety by Robert Davis, Leading Edge Press, North Yorkshire, UK, 1992, and report questions whether seat belts save lives by M. Hammer, New Scientist, February 7, 1985 p7, Evaluation of Automobile Safety Regulations, The Case of Compulsory Seatbelt Legislation in Australia. By J. A. C. Coney-Beer, Policy Sciences 1227-39, 1980, Compulsory Seatbelt Use, Further Inferences, by P. Hurst Accident Analysis and Prevention, Vol. 11, 27-33, 1979, Wild GS Risk Homeostasis in Traffic Accidents Propositions, Deductions and Discussion of Dissension in Recent Reactions, Ergonomics 1988 Vol. 31, 439, Methodological Issues in Testing the Hypothesis of Risk Compensation by Brian Dewlis, Accident Analysis and Prevention Volume 25, 285-292, 1997, Rs. 255. The Initial Impact of Seatbelt Legislation in Ireland by Ahern, and Forres Forbather, Dublin, 1981, The Efficacy of Seatbelt Legislation, a Comparative Study of Road Accident Fatality Statistics from 18 Countries, by J. Adams. Department of Geography University College, London 1981, Casualty Reductions, Whose Problem? By F. Westerarm, Traffic Engineering and Control, September 1990, The Puzzle of Seat Belts Explained, press release of the Annual Conference of the British Psychological Society, April 1999, Reconsidering the Effects of Seatbelt Laws and Their Enforcement Status by TSD Accident Analysis and Prevention, Vol. 30, 1, 1-10, 1998, External links, links to cite studies that endorse seatbelts, U.S. Department of Transportation, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, Occupant Protection, PDF Seatbelt Wearing in Scotland, a second study of compliance, UK Department for Transport, Think. Road Safety, Prevention Institute, Seatbelts Current Issues, Review of Economics and Statistics, Volume 85, pages 828-843, 2003, Fitting and Wearing of Seatbelts in Australia, The History of a Successful Countermeasure by P. W. Milne, Australian Government Publishing Service, 1985. Links to cite studies skeptical critical of seatbelt legislation plus, Seatbelt Laws Why You Should Be Worried, Stick It to Click It or Ticket, The Coalition for Seatbelt Choice, Do Seatbelt Laws Work? Seatbelt Laws, A Clumsy Perspective by Professor John Adams. PDF format, Review of Seatbelt Effectiveness, link to article on the Hawaii Seatbelt Law.